Hi everybody and welcome to a new video. Today I'm doing something a little different from my usual videos and I'm doing a style challenge. I got this idea from one of Lavender Town's most recent videos where she drew her character in the style of other animes. I added a little twist to this challenge though and decided to draw my character in the style of some of my favorite webtoons. If you don't know what Webtoons is, it's an app and website where you can read webcomics. There are a bunch of really good comics on there, so I recommend you check it out if you haven't yet. I'll also be leaving links below to all the webcomics featured in this video if you want to go read them. Small spoiler warning to anyone who hasn't read these comics yet, I may talk about events from them, so if you aren't caught up on them, please go read them. The character I'm drawing right now is Astra, the main character in my webcomic Stardust. They're a small child who has amnesia and is trying to learn more about themselves and their past, and along the way they make a lot of interesting friends. They also, unfortunately, make quite a few enemies, so their adventures aren't all fun and games. I love to write dramatic stories, so be prepared for some drama later on. The story is set in space and has futuristic and spacey imagery because I love space stuff. One main feature in Astra's design is their galaxy-colored hair. I feel like that and their eyes are something really unique to my style. As you can see, I add a lot of layers and effects to the hair and eyes to really make the colors pop. Coloring is one of my favorite parts of making my comic because I love to play around with colors, especially on my characters. However, I try and keep the color palettes limited so I don't go too crazy with them. So the way that I draw Astra is very round and soft because they are a child after all. They're only about 12 at the start of my comic, so I try and draw them really cute and tiny. Another thing I like to do when coloring is to use a multiply layer for shading, and I usually pick a color that suits the character well, so for Astra it's purple. Finally, for highlights, I do a very thick white highlight in areas I think it works well in. This is just something I started doing for the comic, and I think it looks really interesting with my style. I don't usually use it for finished illustrations though, because for some reason it only looks good to me in the comic setting. So the first webcomic that I drew from is called Castle Swimmer. I only recently started reading this one, but it quickly became one of my favorites. As soon as I saw it was about merpeople, I was immediately interested because who doesn't love some good merpeople? What makes it even more interesting is the story is a gay romance, and I am here for that LGBT representation. I try to add LGBT representation in a lot of my stories, including Stardust, because I feel it's important to have that. And having cute gay merpeople is definitely important to me, so that's why I love this comic. The main characters are Siren and Kappa, and I chose a younger Kappa as a reference for Astra. This art style was definitely the easiest for me to draw because it's very round and soft like my own art style. Kappa also reminds me a lot of Astra because they're both small babies who are destined for things they may not necessarily want. Neither of them asked to be special, but they are anyways. Honestly, I bet they would be good friends if they ever met. I was very tempted to draw Astra as a merperson, but I decided against it because it's supposed to be just how Astra would look in the style, not necessarily the setting of the story. Instead, I just made it look like they were floating in air or underwater perhaps. Since Castle Swimmer is set underwater, the author draws all the characters with very flowy hair, which honestly is so much fun to draw. It makes me want to draw more characters with flowy hair now, and I'm gonna have to do that at some point. The coloring was a little harder to replicate because the author has a unique way of shading the characters to mimic them being underwater. In the end, I used an overlay layer to make the colors look a little bit darker. I also had to change the eyes quite a bit so I could mimic the shininess that they have in the comic. I love how the eyes look in Castle Swimmer, and I don't think I quite did the coloring justice, but I tried my best. The next comic I chose was Olympus. This has got to be one of my all-time favorites because I love the story. It's a very interesting take on the classic Greek myth of Persephone and Hades, and boy do I love retellings of Greek myths. All the characters are written really well and they all have such fun and unique personalities. I love all the characters, except Apollo. Nobody likes Apollo. If he even dares to look at Persephone again, I will throw down. But that's besides the point. My favorite characters are, surprise, Persephone and Hades. They're just so cute. Like, Persephone is so adorable and Hades is a shy dork sometimes. I love it. Hades is also one of my favorite types of characters in romance stories, so yeah, even more of a reason I like it. The designs in the comic are also very unique and nice. Every character basically has their own color. For example, Persephone is pink and Hades is blue. For Astra, I picked purple because that's normally the main color I use for them. However, I'm now just realizing Apollo is also purple, so like, I've decided Apollo will now be replaced with my sweet baby Astra. Just throw the whole Apollo out. We don't need him anymore. I'm just kidding, of course. Without Apollo, we'd have no drama, and drama can be very fun in stories, especially Greek myths. Anyways, I thought this style would be the hardest to draw because it's lineless, and I don't really make a lot of lineless artwork. But surprisingly, it wasn't too difficult to draw, and I think the final result turned out really well. As you can see, I took the sketch layer and put it above the coloring layer so that I could see where the colors should go. The author has such a unique way of coloring, it was really fun to experiment with brushes and colors to try and recreate her style. I used a lot of scratchy brushes not only for the coloring, but the line art as well. The author seems to use a brush with jagged edges for her line art, so I tried to copy that to the best of my abilities. I used Persephone as a reference because she's the smallest and cutest character in my opinion, so she was a perfect reference for Astra. It was really hard to just pick one drawing of Persephone as a reference because there are so many cute faces she has, but I decided a simple smiling one would be the best. One thing that I noticed was similar to my art style and Olympus's is that we both use a thick white highlight on our characters. I never really noticed that until I started doing this drawing, so that was interesting to me. Lastly, I added sparkles in Astra's hair, similar to the flowers that Persephone grows in her hair. Since that represents a bit of Persephone's powers, I figured Astra would have something similar to represent their own powers too. A big part of Astra's design is that their hair looks like space, so what better to do than add some twinkling stars? The third webcomic I picked to draw from was Age Matters. I also only recently started reading this webcomic, but as soon as I started reading it, I couldn't stop. I binge read the whole thing over like 2 or 3 days. The story is about a woman named Rose who is pretty down on her luck. She doesn't have a job and had recently gone through a very bad breakup. She ends up working for a younger guy named Daniel, who is a very successful billionaire and owner of the company Lime. I absolutely love their dynamic in this comic. Rose is a very fun and lighthearted person, and Daniel is very serious. Their contrasting personalities makes them super cute, and it's one of my favorite tropes in romance stories. Daniel is also another one of my favorite types of characters in romance. I love the very stern character who is actually really sweet. All the characters in this comic are really good though, and I love them all so far. The author writes them really well, and I find it hard not to like the characters. For this comic, it was a bit harder to find a reference for Astra since the comic focuses around adult characters for the most part. Luckily, I found an extra drawing the author did of Daniel as a child, and it was a good reference to use. I also went and looked at the comic while coloring to make sure I got it right. I do think I got the shading wrong though. I used more local color shading, whereas the author probably uses a multiply layer with one color to shade instead. But that's okay. I was going to add some dramatic shading because the author does that a lot, especially for important scenes, but I completely forgot to do that because I was drawing this later at night and it just slipped my mind. Whoops! I do love the dramatic shading though, and I need to remember to add that in my comic more honestly. I did make sure to add a little bit of color to the face that the author tends to put in. It's kind of like how I add blush to my character's face. I'm not really sure how to properly describe it. For the hair, I used the 3 main colors I usually use in Astra's hair for the shading and highlight colors. I did this for the rest of the drawings in the video too, since it made the most sense with the other art styles. I didn't add the white speckles I usually use in Astra's hair to represent stars because I didn't think it would work well with the style. The hair kept giving me a bit of trouble in this drawing, and I think one side poofs out too much. I would probably fix it and make it smaller now if I could. Another thing that ended up looking a little weird is Astra's scarf. I tried to make the lines look more straight since the author uses a lot of patterns that are very straight in her art, but I didn't think it came out as well as I hoped. The eyes were also a little difficult. I couldn't figure out how to exactly make it look like the comic, but I tried my best. I kept experimenting with overlay and multiply layers until I thought it looked fine. The author has a very unique way of drawing eyes, and I just couldn't replicate it for the life of me. In the end, though, I think it turned out pretty well. The next webcomic I chose is a very popular one at the moment, and for a good reason. This comic is True Beauty, and it's honestly such a good comic. I love the characters and conflict in the story, and it always manages to draw me back for the next chapter. True Beauty is about a girl named Ju-young, and I hope I'm saying that name correctly, who wants to be a makeup artist. She used to be unpopular until she started using makeup to make her appearance look better. Honestly, I think she looks cute without the makeup, but I know the feeling of wanting to look pretty and presentable. As the comic progresses, she meets two guys who seem to be the main love interest for her. The comic isn't primarily a romance though, it's a drama, so there's so much more to the story than just the romance. Ju-young is a very sweet and kind of naive girl. I'm worried she's gonna get into big trouble later in the comic, but hopefully things will work out well for her. Some serious stuff just went down in the most recent chapters, and I'm on the edge of my seat waiting for the next one. The comic also focuses on older characters. I think they're all teenagers or around that age, so it was hard to find a reference for Astra. I used Aiden as a reference for Astra because he was the softest character I could find. Aiden is a very excitable and cutesy boy who wants to be an idol. I thought his bubbly personality fit well with Astra. He also has curlier hair, which matches Astra better too. Even though he's more of a side character, he's still one of my favorites. So the art in this comic has more of a realism look to it, and I'm not so great with realism. The hardest part was making the face look younger and more like a child. However, Astra still ended up looking a little older, so I think this is maybe what Astra would look like in a year or two. Honestly, I think Astra would probably look similar to this if I tried to make a realistic drawing of them. In my own comic, Astra is modeled after cultures that are more Asian, so I think they would be slightly Korean or Japanese looking. One thing I did change was Astra's scarf. I made it look more fashionable instead of making it into a bow, since I know the author uses a lot of fashion in this comic. I tried to make Astra look a bit more modern to fit it better. I did have a lot of fun making this drawing though, and I think it turned out really well. The final comic I chose was Let's Play. I've been reading this comic for a while now, and it's still one of my top favorites. Not only is the story amazing, but the characters in it have so much personality, and I can connect to all of them easily. This comic is about a girl named Sam who wants to be a video game designer, but one of her games got a bad review from a popular streamer online, and then she finds out he's living next door to her, and bam, drama ensues. So, I read a lot of romance, and boy do I live for these cliche plots. Now, I say the plot is cliche in this comic, but the way it's written and played out is not cliche at all. The author knows how to take a basic idea and make it so much more than that. At the moment, there are 3 love interests for Sam. Marshall, the streamer who gave her a bad review but is actually a very nice guy. Link, the childhood friend type who is sweet and caring. And Charles, a bit of a stuffy businessman who works in the same office as Sam, and you think he's gonna be a cold-hearted person, but he's actually a kind guy. At least I hope so. He could still betray my trust at any moment. Anyways, Sam is a very socially awkward person, and boy do I relate to her hardcore. She has a lot of anxiety and fears, and I love how the author addresses all these issues with her characters. It really makes the characters feel human and relatable. Marshall also struggles with depression in this comic, and it's another topic I think the author represents well. Something huge just happened in the season finale with that, and guys, I'm sweating. But anyways, this comic also is another one that has adults for the main cast, so it was definitely the hardest to find a reference for. Luckily, I remember Olivia existed, and I was so thankful for that. Olivia is a minor character, but she is a younger, more childlike character, so she was the best pick for a reference. Surprisingly, this style was the hardest for me to recreate. The author has a style that's a bit more angular than my own, so I think that's why it was so challenging. Also, I couldn't get the eyes exactly the way I wanted them to be, so I think that threw me off. I did add sparkles in Astra's eyes because I noticed Olivia has ones in her own eyes, so I thought that could fit well with them. In the end, I think the drawing turned out alright, but I definitely could have done better with this one. And here's the finished piece. I had so much fun doing this challenge, and I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you have suggestions for more challenges or videos you want to see me do, leave a comment down below. Be sure to go read all the comics mentioned in this video too. They're all really great and I highly recommend them. And maybe check out my comic while you're at it too. Thank you all for watching and see you next time. Bye!